Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable and let your breathing slow. If you enjoy peaceful anime stories like this one, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment to let me know which anime you'd like to hear next. Your support helps this channel continue creating calm, relaxing stories for rest and sleep. Now, let the day fade away and let the story begin. Lucy Heartfilia walked through the busy streets of Fiore with a quiet determination guiding her steps as she searched for a place where she could finally belong, holding on to a dream of joining a guild where magic meant more than power, and people stood together as something greater than individuals. That dream gave her direction, even when the future felt uncertain. It was the beginning of a journey she did not yet understand. Her life changed when she encountered Natsu Dragneel, a fiery dragon slayer traveling across the land in search of his adoptive father, Igneel, accompanied by his loyal companion, Happy, who stayed close by his side at all times. Their meeting felt sudden yet strangely natural, as if their paths had always been meant to cross. In that moment, Lucy stepped into a new world. Natsu brought Lucy to the Fairy Tale Guild, a place filled with loud voices, constant movement, and a chaotic energy that overwhelmed her at first. Yet, beneath that noise was a warmth she had never experienced before. The members argued, laughed, and fought, but they stood together without hesitation. For the first time, Lucy felt she had found home. She soon joined Natsu's team alongside Grey Fullbuster and Erza Scarlet, each carrying their own past, strength, and reason for fighting, forming a group that would take on missions across the kingdom together. Their personalities often clashed, yet their teamwork slowly began to take shape. What started as cooperation began turning into something deeper. Their early missions introduced Lucy to the reality of the wizard world, where danger was constant and magic was not always used for good, as rogue mages and dark guilds created threats that could not be ignored. She quickly realized that this life would test her far more than she expected. The world she entered was both beautiful and dangerous. Through each challenge, Lucy learned that magic was deeply tied to emotion, and that true strength came not from power alone, but from trust and connection with others, shaping how she approached every battle and every decision. The bond between her and her teammates began to grow stronger. These lessons became the foundation of her journey. At the center of everything, Natsu continued his search for Igneel, a quiet goal that guided his actions even when he did not speak of it openly, hinting at a deeper mystery tied to dragons and a forgotten past. That purpose gave his journey direction beyond simple adventure. The shadow of something greater lingered, and as Lucy stood within Fairy Tale, surrounded by people who accepted her without question, she realized her dream had changed from finding a place to belong into building a life worth protecting. One shaped by bonds that would be tested through countless trials ahead. Her journey had only just begun. The path forward would change everything. Lucy's new life in Fairy Tale quickly moved from excitement into reality, as she joined Natsu on her first proper mission outside Acnologia, stepping into a world where magic was not just adventure, but responsibility. The task seemed simple at first, yet it revealed how unpredictable guild work could be. It was her first real test as a wizard. They traveled to rescue a wizard named Macau who had gone missing, only to discover he had been taken over by a powerful curse that twisted his behavior and made him dangerous. Natsu faced him without hesitation, showing Lucy what it meant to fight for someone rather than against them. That moment left a strong impression on her. Not long after, the team became involved in a situation tied to a dark guild known as Eisenwald, a group that used forbidden magic to spread destruction rather than protect others. Their plan involved using a deadly flute called Lullaby, capable of wiping out entire groups at once. The scale of danger quickly rose. Lucy watched as Natsu and the others faced this threat head-on, refusing to allow innocent lives to be taken, even when the odds felt uncertain. The battle was not just about stopping an enemy, but preventing fear from spreading across the land. Fairy Tail stood firmly against that darkness. Through these early missions, Lucy began to understand that being part of Fairy Tail meant more than strength. It meant stepping forward even when the outcome was unclear. The Guild's reputation for chaos came from their willingness to act when others would hesitate. That realization shaped her growth. Soon after, Natsu took on an S-class mission without permission, bringing Lucy and Gray along to Galuna Island, a place surrounded by a mysterious curse that had affected everyone living there. The mission felt far more dangerous than anything Lucy had faced before. The atmosphere itself carried unease. On the island, they encountered Leon, a mage connected to Gray's past, attempting to revive a powerful demon sealed long ago, believing it would prove his strength. This revealed a deeper layer of history, showing that even their enemies were driven by personal goals and past struggles. The conflict became more personal, and as the battle on Galuna Island unfolded, Lucy realized that their journey was no longer just about missions, but about facing the past, protecting the present, and shaping the future. As each step forward brought them deeper into a world where every choice carried weight. Their journey on Galuna Island reached its turning point as the truth behind the so-called curse was revealed. Not as a natural phenomenon, but as a result of a forbidden ritual known as moon drip that had distorted the villagers' memories and perception. The island's people believed they were turning into demons, when in reality, they had always been human. The fear they carried had been built on illusion. Gray was forced to confront his past when Lion attempted to revive Deliora, the demon Gray's master had sacrificed her life to seal away, believing that defeating it would prove his own strength. This conflict was not just about stopping a ritual, but about facing unresolved grief and pride. The battle became deeply personal. As the fight unfolded, Natsu and the others pushed forward, refusing to allow the past to be rewritten through reckless ambition, standing against Lion's actions with determination rather than anger. In that moment, the team showed how far they had already come. Their bond carried them through the conflict. With the ritual stopped and the truth revealed, the people of Galuna Island were finally freed from the fear that had controlled them for so long, allowing them to return to their lives with clarity and peace. The mission ended not just with victory, but with understanding. Lucy began to see the deeper impact of their actions. After returning to Fairy Tail, their lives briefly settled into a familiar rhythm, filled with missions, laughter, and the constant chaos that defined the guild. Yet that calm did not last long, as a new conflict began to rise quietly in the background. Something far more personal was approaching. Soon, Fairy Tail was suddenly attacked by a rival guild known as Phantom Lord, turning Magnolia into a battlefield as buildings were destroyed and members were forced into immediate combat. This was no longer a mission, but a direct assault on their home. The stakes changed instantly. The reason behind the attack was revealed to be Lucy herself, as her father, a powerful and wealthy figure, had hired Phantom Lord to bring her back, seeing her as something to control rather than someone with her own will. That truth forced Lucy to confront her past directly. The conflict became deeply emotional, and as Fairy Tail stood together to defend their guild, refusing to hand Lucy over no matter the cost, it became clear that their bond was not something that could be broken by force, marking the beginning of their first true war as a family willing to protect one of their own at any cost.
When they returned from Galuna Island, the sense of calm did not last long, as Lucy and the others arrived back in Magnolia, only to find the fairy tale guild hall heavily damaged, pierced by massive iron beams that stood as a clear sign of an attack. The destruction was not random, but deliberate. A message had been left behind. The guild soon learned that the attack came from Phantom Lord, a powerful rival guild known for its strength and resources, making this conflict far more serious than anything they had faced before. At first, Fairy Tale chose not to respond immediately, but that decision would not hold for long. The situation escalated when members of Fairy Tale were ambushed and severely injured, an act that crossed a line no guild could ignore, forcing Makarov to declare open war. What had started as intimidation turned into full conflict. The guild stood together without hesitation. Lucy soon discovered the true reason behind the attack, as Phantom Lord had targeted her specifically, acting under the orders of her father, who wanted her brought back by force, seeing her not as independent, but as something he could control. That truth struck deeper than any battle. Even with that revelation, Fairy Tale refused to hand Lucy over, standing firmly as her family rather than treating her as a burden, proving that their bond went beyond strength or obligation. That moment changed how Lucy saw herself. She was no longer alone in facing her past. The war between the two guilds erupted fully, spreading across Magnolia as powerful mages clashed, with Phantom Lord deploying overwhelming attacks designed to break Fairy Tale completely. The city itself became part of the battlefield. The scale of the conflict grew rapidly. Natsu, Erza, Gray, and the others fought fiercely, pushing themselves beyond their limits to protect their guild and each other, refusing to let Phantom Lord destroy what they had built. Every battle carried personal weight. This was not just about victory, but survival. And as the war intensified, it became clear that this was the first true test of Fairy Tale's strength as a family, where their bonds would be pushed to their limits, proving whether they could stand together against an enemy just as powerful as themselves. The war between Fairy Tale and Phantom Lord reached its height as both guilds pushed forward with everything they had, turning Magnolia into a battlefield where every street carried the weight of their clash. The scale of destruction continued to grow, yet Fairy Tale refused to fall back. Their home was worth protecting, no matter the cost. Natsu, Gray, and Erza each faced powerful members of Phantom Lord, battles that tested their strength and forced them to push beyond what they thought they were capable of. These fights were not just about defeating enemies, but about proving what Fairy Tale truly stood for. Their resolve only grew stronger. At the center of the conflict stood Jose Porla, the master of Phantom Lord, whose power rivaled even Makarov, turning their confrontation into a clash between two guild leaders. The battle between them shook the battlefield, showing just how serious the war had become. This was no longer a simple rivalry. Lucy, meanwhile, was taken by Phantom Lord as leverage, forcing her to confront the reality of her past and the expectations placed upon her by her father. Even in captivity, she refused to return, choosing her own path instead of the one chosen for her. That decision showed her true growth. Fairy Tale launched a full assault to rescue her, standing together without hesitation, proving that no member would ever be abandoned, no matter the situation. Their unity became their greatest strength in that moment. It was more than loyalty. It was family. The battle reached its turning point when Makarov overcame Jose, breaking Phantom Lord's leadership and bringing the war to its conclusion. With their master defeated, the rival guild collapsed, marking the end of the conflict. The threat was finally over. After the war, Lucy made a final decision to cut ties with her father's control, choosing to remain with Fairy Tale not out of rebellion, but out of belonging.
She had found a place where she was valued for who she was. That choice defined her future. And as the guild began rebuilding what had been damaged, both physically and emotionally, it became clear that this battle had changed them, strengthening their bond and preparing them for the even greater challenges that still lay ahead.
After the fall of Phantom Lord, Fairy Tale slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the damage left behind was still visible in both the guild hall and the hearts of its members. The war had tested them in ways they had never experienced before. Yet through it all, their bond had only grown stronger. Lucy began to settle more deeply into guild life, no longer feeling like a newcomer, but as someone truly connected to everyone around her, carrying both the joy and responsibility of being part of Fairy Tale. Her confidence grew with each passing mission. She was becoming stronger in her own way. Not long after, a new mission emerged that would take them far from Magnolia once again, leading them toward a place tied to Erza's past, one she had long left behind. The request carried a quiet tension that only she seemed to fully understand. Something unresolved was waiting there. They traveled to the Tower of Heaven, a massive structure built by enslaved workers under the control of dark forces, where Erza had spent her childhood in suffering alongside others who had once been close to her. That place held memories she had tried to bury. Now, she had to face them again. There, they encountered Jalal, someone deeply connected to Erza's past, whose actions were driven by manipulation and the desire to revive Zeref through forbidden means. The conflict quickly became personal, not just for Erza, but for everyone involved. The stakes were far greater than they had expected. As the battle unfolded, Erza struggled with the weight of her past, forced to confront the pain, guilt, and memories she had carried for years, while Natsu and the others fought to protect her and stop the ritual from being completed. Their bond held strong even in the face of darkness. The clash at the tower pushed everyone beyond their limits, especially Natsu, who refused to let the past control the future, fighting not just to win, but to protect Erza from losing herself to everything she had endured. That determination changed the course of the battle, and as the truth behind the tower began to unravel, Lucy realized that their journey was no longer just about missions or enemies, but about facing the deepest parts of themselves, as each arc brought them closer to understanding who they truly were and what they were willing to fight for. The battle at the Tower of Heaven reached its breaking point, as the ritual to revive Zeref moved closer to completion, the structure itself trembling under the strain of forbidden magic being forced into existence. Time began to feel limited, as every second brought the danger closer. The pressure on everyone grew heavier. Erza stood at the center of it all, facing Jalal not just as an enemy, but as someone tied deeply to her past, whose actions were shaped by manipulation and a false belief that he could bring salvation through destruction. She struggled between stopping him and saving him. The conflict cut deeper than any battle before. Natsu and the others fought through the tower, pushing past enemies and obstacles, refusing to let Erza face everything alone, showing that her past was no longer something she had to carry by herself. Their determination changed the course of the fight. Their bond held strong even in chaos. As the ritual reached its final stage, Erza made a decision to sacrifice herself in an attempt to stop it, believing it was the only way to end the cycle tied to her past. That moment revealed how deeply she carried the burden of everything she had endured. It was a choice born from pain. Natsu refused to accept that outcome, stepping forward without hesitation and breaking through the final barrier with sheer determination, proving that the future did not have to repeat the past. His strength came from his refusal to give up on those he cared about. That decision changed everything. With the ritual destroyed, the tower began to collapse, forcing everyone to escape as the structure that had held so much suffering finally came to an end. The past was not erased, but it no longer held control over their future. The battle had ended, but its impact remained. Jalal's fate was left uncertain, his actions no longer driven by his true self, leaving behind a question of whether he could ever return to who he once was. The line between enemy and victim blurred. The story grew more complex, and as they left the ruins behind, Lucy realized that each step of their journey was no longer just about facing enemies, but about freeing people from the weight of their past. As Fairy Tale continued moving forward into a world where every story carried both light and darkness. The aftermath of the Tower of Heaven settled quietly, but its impact lingered within the guild, especially for Erza, who had finally faced the weight of her past and stepped beyond it, no longer defined by the suffering she once endured. The experience had changed her in a way that was not immediately visible. She stood stronger, yet calmer. Back in Magnolia, Fairy Tale returned to its usual rhythm, filled with loud voices, laughter, and constant chaos. Yet beneath it all was a deeper sense of unity, shaped by everything they had gone through together. Their bond had been tested and proven. The guild felt more like a family than ever before. Lucy continued to grow, no longer just observing the strength of others, but stepping forward with more confidence in her own abilities, understanding that her role within the team was just as important. Her connection with her celestial spirits deepened. She was becoming someone who could stand on equal ground. Not long after, a new tension began to rise within the guild itself, as Laxus, one of Fairy Tale's strongest members, began to act in ways that challenged the very foundation of what the guild stood for. His belief in strength above all else created a divide. The peace within the guild began to crack. Laxus initiated a conflict known as the Battle of Fairy Tale, trapping the guild within a barrier and forcing members to fight one another, turning friends into opponents in a test of power and loyalty. The situation quickly escalated beyond control. The guild was thrown into chaos from within. Natsu, Erza, Gray, and the others refused to accept this, fighting not to defeat each other, but to restore what Fairy Tale truly meant, standing against Laxus's vision of strength without connection. Their resolve came from their bonds, not their power. That difference defined the battle. As the conflict reached its peak, Laxus was forced to confront the truth that strength alone could not replace the value of trust, friendship, and unity, realizing that his path had taken him away from what Fairy Tale truly stood for. That realization marked a turning point for him, and as the battle came to an end, the guild stood together once more, not broken, but stronger for having faced a conflict from within, proving that even when divided, their bond could not be destroyed, setting the stage for even greater challenges ahead. After the fall of Phantom Lord and the events at the Tower of Heaven, Fairy Tale returned to Magnolia with a stronger sense of unity, yet the world around them continued to shift, bringing new challenges that tested not just their strength, but their identity as a guild. The calm they experienced never lasted long. Something new was already beginning to rise. Lucy had grown noticeably, no longer hesitant in battle, but confident in her role within the team, understanding that her magic and her decisions carried weight just like everyone else's. Her bond with her celestial spirits deepened with each mission. She was no longer just following, but leading in her own way. Soon, the guild was drawn into another conflict, one that involved multiple guilds working together against a powerful dark alliance known as Oración Seis, a group formed with the goal of obtaining an ancient, destructive magic capable of reshaping the world. The scale of this mission was far beyond anything they had faced before. For the first time, Fairy Tale worked alongside other guilds, forming an alliance that showed how serious the threat had become, as even rival guilds set aside their differences to face a common enemy. This changed how Lucy and the others saw the larger world. It was not just Fairy Tale anymore. During this conflict, they met Wendy Marvell, a young dragon slayer whose past connected deeply to the mystery of dragons and the events that had shaped the current era. Her presence added a new layer to the story that had been slowly building. The pieces were starting to connect. The battles against Erza Scarlet pushed each member beyond their limits, forcing them to rely not just on their own strength, but on the combined effort of everyone involved, showing that even the strongest could not stand alone against certain threats. Unity became the key to survival. As the conflict unfolded, the name Zeref began to surface again, no longer just a distant legend, but a presence tied directly to the enemies they faced and the deeper forces moving behind the scenes. The story was beginning to shift towards something much larger. And as the Alliance succeeded in stopping Erza Scarlet, Lucy realized that their journey was no longer just about growing stronger within fairy tale, but about understanding the wider world of magic, where every battle was connected to something greater still unfolding. After the Alliance defeated Erza Scarlet, the world did not return to peace, but instead revealed a new layer of complexity, as fairy tale found themselves drawn into a strange phenomenon that led them to another world entirely, one where everything they knew was reversed. The shift felt sudden and disorienting. Nothing followed the same rules anymore. They were transported to a parallel world known as Edolas, a place where magic functioned differently, and where people they knew existed as completely different versions of themselves. Friends became strangers, and familiar faces carried unfamiliar intentions. The experience challenged their understanding of identity. In Edolas, they discovered that magic was a limited resource, one that the kingdom sought to control completely, leading to the capture of wizards from Earthland to sustain their power. This revealed a world built on imbalance and control. The stakes quickly became clear. Natsu, Lucy, and the others were forced to navigate this unfamiliar environment, working alongside unexpected allies, including alternate versions of those they knew, to uncover the truth behind the kingdom's actions. Trust became more difficult in a world where nothing was consistent. During this conflict, they encountered the Exceed's origins, learning more about Happy and others like him, revealing that their existence was tied directly to this alternate world. That discovery added emotional weight to the journey. The story deepened further. As the battle against Edolas' rulers unfolded, Fairy Tale fought not just to survive, but to restore balance, ensuring that magic could return to its natural state rather than being controlled by a single force. Their goal was not domination, but freedom. In the end, the world of Edolas was changed, and Fairy Tale returned to their own world, carrying new understanding about magic, identity, and the connections between worlds. The experience left a lasting impression on them all, and as they stepped back into Earthland, it became clear that their journey was expanding beyond simple missions, moving into something far greater, where each new arc revealed deeper truths about the world and their place within it. After returning from Edolas, the world of Earthland did not remain still, as Fairy Tale found themselves stepping into a period that felt both familiar and uncertain, as if something deeper was quietly approaching beneath the surface. Life in the guild resumed, but there was a subtle tension in the air. It felt like a calm before something much larger. Lucy noticed how everyone had changed slightly, not in obvious ways, but in how they carried themselves, as if each journey had added something deeper to who they were becoming. Their experiences were beginning to shape them beyond simple strength. Growth had become part of their identity. Soon, the guild accepted a mission that led them toward Tenrou Island, a sacred place tied to Fairy Tale's origins and its strongest members, where the S-Class Mage promotion trial would take place. This event was meant to test not just power, but character and resolve. The stakes were personal this time. As the trial began, members were paired and tested in different ways, forcing them to rely on trust, strategy, and emotional strength rather than raw power alone. Lucy found herself facing challenges that pushed her beyond her limits. The trial revealed who they truly were. However, the trial was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of Grimoire Heart, a dark guild directly connected to Zeref, bringing a level of danger far beyond what anyone had expected. Their presence turned the island into a battlefield. Everything changed instantly. The battles against Grimoire Heart forced Fairy Tail to push beyond their limits once again, as they faced enemies who possessed overwhelming strength and knowledge tied to ancient magic. The name Zeref surfaced more clearly than ever before. The story deepened into something far more serious. During the conflict, Natsu encountered Zeref himself, not as a distant legend, but as a real person whose existence carried both immense power and deep sorrow. This moment shifted everything, revealing that the story they were part of was much larger than they had imagined. And as the battle on Tenrou Island reached its peak, the arrival of Acnologia, the black dragon of the apocalypse, changed everything completely, turning the island into the center of a disaster that would reshape the future of Fairy Tail and mark the beginning of one of their most devastating trials. As Acnologia unleashed his full power upon Tenrou Island, the sky itself seemed to fracture under the weight of his presence, his roar echoing across the battlefield, as even the strongest mages stood frozen before him. The scale of destruction far surpassed anything Fairy Tail had ever faced. In that moment, survival itself felt uncertain. The guild stood together despite the overwhelming force before them, refusing to run even when defeat seemed inevitable, as their bond held them in place against something no one could defeat alone. Their strength was no longer just in magic, but in unity. That resolve became their final stand. Makarov stepped forward, using everything he had to protect the guild, casting a powerful spell in an attempt to shield them from Acnologia's attack, knowing the cost it might take from him. His decision reflected the heart of Fairy Tail itself. It was an act of pure sacrifice. Acnologia's attack struck the island with devastating force, engulfing everything in a blinding wave of destruction, leaving no certainty of survival for anyone caught within it. The moment felt like the end of everything they had built. The world seemed to fall silent. Time passed in a way that no one could feel, as Tenrou Island disappeared from the world, leaving behind only uncertainty and loss, as Fairy Tail was believed to have been completely destroyed. The guild's absence created a void across Fiore. Their story seemed to end there. 7 years later, the truth was revealed, as the members of Fairy Tail returned, having been preserved by the island's magic, untouched by the passage of time while the world had moved forward without them. Everything around them had changed. They had been left behind. The guild they returned to was no longer the strongest, but one that had fallen into decline. Its reputation diminished, and its members scattered or weakened over time. Fairy Tail had lost its place in the world. The reality was difficult to accept, and as Lucy stood within the quiet remains of the guild, reunited with her friends, yet surrounded by a changed world, she realized that their journey was far from over, as they would now have to rebuild not just their strength, but their identity, in a world that no longer saw them as they once were. The world moved forward without Fairy Tail during those 7 years, and when the guild finally returned, they were no longer seen as the strongest, but as a shadow of what they once were, their reputation replaced by newer, stronger guilds. The shift was difficult to accept. Everything had changed while they stood still. Lucy reunited with her friends, yet even that joy carried a quiet weight, as she realized how much time had passed for everyone else while they had been gone. The gap between them and the world felt real. Still, their bond remained unchanged. Fairy Tail now stood at the bottom of the rankings, no longer respected, often dismissed by others who had risen in their absence. This loss of status was not just about pride, but about identity. The guild had to find its place again. Despite this, Natsu and the others refused to accept defeat, choosing instead to rebuild their strength and prove that Fairy Tail had not fallen, but simply been left behind. Their determination became their driving force. The comeback had begun. Soon, an opportunity appeared in the form of the Grand Magic Games, a tournament that brought together the strongest guilds in Fiore to compete for recognition and power. This was more than a competition. It was their chance to rise again. Fairy Tail entered the games despite being underestimated by everyone, placed at the bottom from the very beginning, with no expectation of success. Yet, they stood firm, carrying the pride of their guild into every challenge. Their resolve was stronger than their ranking. Each battle pushed them forward, slowly shifting how others saw them, as they fought not just with strength, but with the unity that had always defined them. The guild that had been forgotten began to be seen again. Their presence started to change the atmosphere of the tournament, and as the Grand Magic Games continued, it became clear that this was not just a test of power, but a turning point, where Fairy Tail would either reclaim its place in the world or remain lost in the shadow of what it once was. The Grand Magic Games continued, and Fairy Tail slowly began to rise from the bottom, not through sudden power, but through steady determination in each event, proving that their strength had not disappeared despite the years they had lost. Every victory carried meaning beyond points. Their comeback was becoming real. At first, they were underestimated, placed last and dismissed by stronger guilds like Sabertooth, who had dominated the games for years, holding the title of the strongest guild in Fiore. Yet Fairy Tail did not react with anger, but with quiet resolve. They chose to prove themselves through action. Each day of the games brought new challenges, from strategic events to direct battles, forcing every member to step forward and contribute, showing their growth in ways that surprised even those who doubted them. The gap between them and the top guilds slowly began to close. The atmosphere shifted. Erza's overwhelming performance against the 100 monsters became a turning point, showing everyone that Fairy Tail still possessed strength capable of standing above the rest. That moment reignited their reputation across the arena. The crowd began to see them differently. Lucy faced her own struggles within the tournament, pushed into difficult battles where she had to rely on her intelligence and bond with her spirits rather than brute strength, showing how much she had grown since the beginning of her journey. Her role became more defined. As the games progressed, tensions between guilds increased, especially with Sabertooth, whose pride and dominance clashed directly with Fairy Tail's steady rise. The rivalry became one of the central forces driving the competition forward. Every match carried more weight. At the same time, something darker began to unfold behind the scenes, as the purpose of the games was not just competition, but the gathering of magical energy for a hidden plan tied to the Eclipse Gate. The tournament was only the surface. Something far greater was being prepared. And as Fairy Tail pushed toward the final stages of the Grand Magic Games, it became clear that their journey was no longer just about reclaiming their title, but about uncovering a hidden truth that would soon turn the entire event into something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. The Grand Magic Games reached their final stage, and Fairy Tail stood at the edge of reclaiming their place as the strongest guild, their steady rise turning into a full comeback that no one could ignore. What began as doubt had transformed into recognition. The entire arena watched them differently now. As the final battles unfolded, Natsu confronted Sting of Sabertooth, a clash that symbolized the shift in power between the old champions and the returning Fairy Tail. proving that strength built on pride alone could not stand against bonds built on trust. That battle marked a turning point for both guilds. The outcome reshaped their rivalry. With their final victory secured, Fairy Tail emerged as the champions of the Grand Magic Games, reclaiming their title and restoring their name across Fiore, proving that they had not been left behind, but had returned stronger than before. The guild stood at the top once again. Their comeback was complete. However, the celebration did not last long, as the truth behind the Eclipse Gate was finally revealed, exposing a hidden plan that had been building throughout the games, tied to time itself and a dangerous experiment meant to open a path to the past. The victory quickly turned into uncertainty. Something far more dangerous was unfolding. From the gate, dragons began to emerge, creatures thought lost to history, bringing destruction across the capital as the city turned into a battlefield, forcing Fairy Tail and all other guilds to fight together to protect the people. The scale of the threat surpassed everything they had faced. The world itself was at risk. Amid the chaos, a future version of Lucy appeared, revealing that this event was part of a timeline where everything had fallen into ruin, and that she had returned to prevent that future from becoming reality. Her presence added urgency to the situation. The stakes became deeply personal. The truth behind the dragon's arrival was tied to future Rogue, who had manipulated events to open the gate, believing that controlling the dragons would reshape the future, even if it meant destruction in the present. His actions showed how far desperation could push someone. The conflict carried both fear and tragedy. And as the battle against the dragons unfolded across the city, Fairy Tail stood alongside every guild in a united effort to stop the destruction, marking a moment where the entire world of magic came together, proving that their journey had grown beyond rivalry into something that would decide the fate of everyone. The chaos of the dragon invasion slowly began to settle as the Eclipse Gate was finally destroyed, closing the path that had allowed creatures from the past to enter the present, and preventing the timeline from collapsing completely. The dragons that had appeared were forced back, and the future that had nearly been rewritten began to fade. The danger had been stopped, but its impact remained. Future Lucy's mission came to an end as the timeline corrected itself, her presence disappearing along with the altered future she had tried to prevent, leaving behind only the memories of what could have been. That moment carried both relief and quiet sadness. Her sacrifice ensured that the present could continue. With the crisis over, the kingdom began to recover from the destruction caused by the dragons, rebuilding what had been lost while the guilds slowly returned to their normal lives. The Grand Magic Games ended, not just as a competition, but as a turning point for the entire world. Everything had changed. Fairy Tail stood recognized once again as the strongest guild, their victory in the games now reinforced by their role in protecting the kingdom during the crisis. Their reputation had been fully restored. They were no longer seen as a fallen guild. Yet even as peace returned, the story did not slow down. As deeper consequences of the eclipse incident began to surface, revealing that the events tied to time and dragons had not fully settled. The world felt unstable beneath the surface. Something else was beginning to move. Lucy and the others returned to Acnologia, but the atmosphere within the guild carried a subtle shift, as if everyone understood that the challenges ahead would not be like the ones they had already faced. Their journey was evolving into something much larger. Across the land, the name Zeref began to appear more frequently again, no longer distant or mysterious, but connected directly to the events that were unfolding, tying together the past, the dragons, and the future. The truth was slowly closing in, and as Fairy Tail settled briefly into their restored place at the top, it became clear that their journey was entering a darker phase, one where the threats ahead would not just challenge their strength, but test everything they believed.
setting the stage for the next major conflict that would change everything once again.
The aftermath of the eclipse incident did not settle as peacefully as it first appeared,
as the events surrounding time, dragons, and future Rogue left behind a deeper unease across the world of magic. Fairy Tale had reclaimed its place, yet the sense of stability felt fragile. Something unresolved lingered beneath the surface. Lucy could not forget the future she had seen, nor the version of herself who had sacrificed everything to prevent it. And that memory stayed with her as a quiet reminder that even victory could carry consequences. Her understanding of their journey had grown deeper. The future was no longer something distant. Across Fiore, dark movements began to rise again, not openly like before, but carefully and quietly, as if something was being prepared in the shadows rather than forced into the light. These were not random threats. They carried purpose and control. The name Zeref began to surface more frequently, no longer just as a legend or distant figure, but as someone actively shaping the events behind the scenes, tying together everything from the dragons to the events of the Eclipse Gate. His presence became unavoidable. Within Fairy Tale, the members trained harder than before, not out of fear, but out of awareness that the next conflict would not be like the ones they had already faced, as if every previous battle had only been leading towards something greater. The stakes were rising again. Natsu felt that shift as well, even if he could not fully explain it, as his connection to dragons and the deeper mysteries of the world slowly began to move closer to the surface, pulling him towards something he had yet to understand. His journey was far from over. Soon, reports began to spread of a dark guild unlike any before, one that did not rely on human mages, but on something far more dangerous, creatures tied directly to Zeref's magic itself. The nature of the enemy was changing. The threat was evolving. And as Fairy Tale prepared to move once more, it became clear that their journey was entering a darker phase, one that would test not just their strength, but everything they believed about magic, life, and the bonds that had carried them this far.
The rising tension across Fiore finally took shape as Fairy Tale began to move against a new and far more dangerous enemy, a dark guild known as Tartaros, whose existence was tied directly to Zeref and the deepest secrets of magic. Unlike previous enemies, this group did not act openly, but struck with precision and intent. Their presence changed everything. The first sign of their power came when the Magic Council itself was destroyed almost instantly, wiped out before it could respond, showing that Tartaros was not just another threat, but one capable of reshaping the entire balance of the magical world. The scale of danger became undeniable. The world was no longer stable. Fairy Tale and their allies were forced into action, stepping into a conflict where every battle carried greater risk, as they faced enemies who were not human, but demons created from the books of Zeref himself, beings built purely for destruction. This revelation changed the nature of the war. The enemy had evolved. As the battle spread, the true goal of Tartaros was revealed: the activation of Face, a massive network of magical bombs designed to erase all magic across the continent, effectively ending the era of wizards completely. The stakes rose beyond anything they had faced before. Everything was on the line. Gray found himself facing one of his most painful moments when he encountered his father, Silver, who had been revived and twisted into an enemy, forcing him to confront both grief and truth at the same time. That battle was not just physical. It reshaped who he was. Lucy was pushed to her limit as well, making a heartbreaking decision to sacrifice Aquarius in order to summon the Celestial Spirit King and save her friends, proving that her strength came not from power alone, but from the bonds she was willing to protect. That moment marked her growth. At the peak of the conflict, the truth about the Dragon Slayers was revealed, as the dragons emerged from within them, having been sealed inside to protect them from a greater fate, and among them was Igneel, finally appearing after years of absence. The mystery was unfolding, and as Igneel stepped forward to face Acnologia, the most powerful dragon of all, the battlefield shifted into something far greater than a war between guilds, becoming the beginning of a clash that would decide the fate of dragons, magic, and the entire world itself. The battle between Igneel and Acnologia shook the very foundation of the world, as two ancient forces collided in a clash that went far beyond anything fairy tale had witnessed before, turning the battlefield into something overwhelming and impossible to ignore. Natsu stood frozen, watching the one he had searched for finally stand before him. The moment carried both hope and fear. Igneel revealed the truth that had been hidden for years, that the dragons had sealed themselves inside the dragon slayers to protect them from becoming dragons themselves, waiting for the moment they would be needed most. This revelation changed everything Natsu believed about his past. The mystery of his journey was finally unfolding. Despite Igneel's immense power, Acnologia proved to be far beyond even that, overwhelming him in a brutal battle that ended with Igneel's defeat, leaving Natsu to witness the loss of the one he had waited so long to find. The moment broke something within him. It was a loss that would stay with him forever. With Igneel gone, the battlefield fell into silence, as the dragons disappeared once more, leaving behind a world that felt heavier than before, as if something important had been taken from it. The victory against Tartaros no longer felt complete. The cost had been too great. The threat of Face was stopped, preventing the destruction of all magic, and Tartaros was defeated. But the aftermath carried a weight that no victory could erase, leaving Fairy Tale standing in a world that felt uncertain and changed. The darkness had not fully passed. It had only shifted. In the quiet that followed, Natsu made a decision without hesitation, choosing to leave on a journey to grow stronger, carrying the memory of Igneel as both pain and purpose, knowing that what lay ahead would require more than what he currently had. His path moved forward alone. At the same time, Makarov made a difficult choice to disband Fairy Tale, believing that the dangers still rising in the world would only put his members at greater risk if they remained together, choosing separation as a form of protection. The guild that once stood unbreakable was now scattered. And as the members went their separate ways, each carrying their own path forward, it became clear that this was not the end of Fairy Tale, but a quiet turning point, where everything would have to be rebuilt again, setting the stage for the final chapter of their journey. The silence that followed the disbandment of Fairy Tale stretched across the land, not empty, but filled with quiet growth as each member walked their own path, carrying the memories of everything they had endured together. The guild no longer stood as one, yet its spirit remained within each of them. It had not disappeared, only scattered. Lucy remained in Magnolia, continuing to write and live forward while holding on to the belief that Fairy Tale would one day return, her connection to the guild never fading even in its absence. Her strength had changed, becoming something quieter but more grounded. She no longer felt lost. A year passed, and during that time, the world continued to move, new forces rising quietly as the absence of Fairy Tale left a space others began to fill, shifting the balance of power once again. The calm that followed Tartaros had not lasted. Something new was forming. Then, without warning, Natsu returned, stronger and more focused, carrying the weight of Igneel's loss, but no longer consumed by it, stepping back into Lucy's life as if no time had passed, yet clearly changed by everything he had gone through. His presence reignited something familiar. Together, they began searching for their scattered friends, traveling across Fiore to reunite the guild piece by piece, proving that Fairy Tale was never truly gone, only waiting to be rebuilt. Each reunion carried meaning, shaped by time apart. The bond had never broken. One by one, the members returned, bringing with them their growth, their struggles, and their resolve, rebuilding the guild not as it once was, but as something stronger,
shaped by everything they had experienced. Fairy Tale stood once again. It lived through its people. But even as the guild reunited, the world did not remain still, as a new and overwhelming force began to move toward Fiore, one far greater than any enemy before, led by Zeref himself, bringing with it an army capable of reshaping the world. The final war was approaching, and as Fairy Tale stood together once more, stronger than ever, it became clear that everything they had faced had been leading to this moment, where their bonds, their growth, and their choices would be tested one last time in a battle that would decide the fate of everything.
The war began without hesitation, as the Alvarez Empire launched its full invasion into Fiore, bringing with it an army far greater than anything the kingdom had ever faced, made up of hundreds of conquered guilds united under Zeref's command. The scale of the conflict spread across the entire land. There was no safe place left untouched. Fairy Tale stood alongside other guilds to resist the invasion, forming a united front against an enemy that far outnumbered them, as battles broke out across cities, forests, and open fields, turning the entire continent into a battlefield. This was no longer a single guild's fight. It was a war for the world itself. The Spriggan 12, Zeref's strongest warriors, began to move across Fiore, each possessing overwhelming power that pushed Fairy Tale to their absolute limits, forcing every member to fight harder than ever before. These enemies were unlike any they had faced. Each battle felt like a final test. Erza faced Irene, a mage tied to the origin of Dragon Slayer magic, uncovering truths about her own past that she had never known, forcing her to confront not just an enemy, but her own identity. That battle became one of her most personal struggles. It reshaped her understanding of herself. Gray was drawn into conflict with demons tied to Zeref's creations, while also struggling internally with the truth about Natsu being END, the demon meant to kill Zeref, forcing him to question what he might have to do if that truth fully awakened. That weight stayed with him. Lucy fought alongside her celestial spirits, with a strength and confidence that showed how far she had come, no longer standing behind others, but beside them, facing enemies that once would have overwhelmed her. Her growth was undeniable. She had become a true pillar of the team. At the center of it all, Natsu moved closer to his final confrontation with Zeref, as the truth of their connection became unavoidable, revealing that their fates had been tied together since long before either of them understood it. The past and present were finally colliding. And as the war intensified, it became clear that everything Fairy Tale had faced, every battle, every loss, and every bond had been leading to this moment, where the outcome would not just decide victory, but determine the fate of magic, life, and the future of their entire world. The war reached its emotional and decisive peak as Natsu finally stood face to face with Zeref, not just as enemies, but as brothers, bound by a past shaped by loss, resurrection, and a curse that had affected the entire world. The battlefield seemed to quiet around them, as if everything else paused for this moment. This was the confrontation that had been building since the very beginning. Zeref revealed the full truth, that he had revived Natsu as END, the demon meant to kill him, hoping to end his own curse of immortality, which forced him to bring death to everything he loved. His goal was not domination, but release, even if it meant rewriting time itself. His pain had shaped everything. Natsu rejected that fate, choosing not to become the demon Zeref created, but to fight as himself, shaped by the bonds he had built with Fairy Tale rather than the darkness of his origin. His strength came from connection, not destiny. That choice defined the battle between them. Their clash shook the battlefield, fire and dark magic colliding as both pushed beyond their limits. Yet the fight was not driven by hatred, but by understanding, as Natsu refused to let Zeref continue his cycle of despair. It was not just a battle of power, but of will. In the end, Zeref was defeated, not through destruction alone, but through the breaking of his curse, as Mavis, bound by the same fate, returned his feelings and ended their eternal suffering together. Their long story came to a quiet and tragic close. But even as Zeref fell, the war was not yet over, as the final and greatest threat remained, Acnologia, whose power surpassed all others, and whose goal was the complete destruction of everything. The sky itself seemed to darken as he appeared. The final battle had begun. The Dragon Slayers united. Natsu, Dragneel, Wendy, and the others, standing together against Acnologia, fighting across both the physical world and the rift of time, combining their strength in a way they never had before. This was no longer about individuals. It was about unity. With the combined effort of everyone, Natsu delivered the final blow, destroying Acnologia and ending the threat that had existed since the Age of Dragons, bringing the long war to its true conclusion. The world finally fell into peace, and as fairy tales stood together once more, Lucy realized their journey had never been about becoming the strongest, but about the bonds that carried them forward. A story that would continue beyond its ending. Thank you for spending this quiet time here. If this story brought you calm, you're welcome to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing which anime story you'd like to hear next. New peaceful stories are always on their way. Now let your breathing slow once more. Let the night settle gently around you and drift softly into rest. Good night and sweet dreams.